Welcome to the Center for U.S. War Veterans Oral Histories at the National Guard Militia Museum of New Jersey in Seagirt, a partner of the Library of Congress's Veterans History Project. Today is July 13th, 2016. I am Carol Fowler, Director of the Center. William Elwell is our intern from Monmouth University. Our honored veteran is David H. Lande, good, who served with the United States Army from July of 1991 until July of 1994, and was with the 82nd Airborne Division at the end of the Cold War. He was trained as a judge advocate, and he was at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, as well as he was in Egypt. Thank you for wanting to be here today. Can I call you David?
Yes, that's fine.
Your eyewitness account is considered a primary historical source and a valuable contribution to the Veteran Oral History Project here at the National Guard Militia Museum. And good afternoon and welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Good. And tell us how you heard about us.
Actually, we met at a function where Cory Booker was one of the speakers, and you had advised me that there was a military museum, which I did not know there was in New Jersey. I think I was aware of the Vietnam Veterans Museum, but that was about it. So that perked my interest, and obviously I contacted you, and that ultimately led to this interview.
And Captain Solomino was our point of contact.
Correct, Vincent Solomino, yes.
Our previous curator here.
Oh, I did not realize he was the previous curator,
did?
but
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
no, but he was present as well as Colonel Jeff Cantor.
Oh, okay, good. All right, and take us back to life prior to service. Who in your family had served before you?
My father was in the Air Force. He was in the Air Force during Korea and had served in Portland, Oregon as an air traffic controller, and then did a tour in Japan during the Korean War. Served 4 years, rose to the rank of staff sergeant, which is almost unheard of in 4 years, and was actually offered a position as an E7 if he was to re-enlist after 4 years, but declined that since they would not guarantee it to him at the time of his last 4 years. They said you have to re-enlist first, so he decided to get out of the service and then took a job in civilian life, got married and had children. My brother was also in service. My younger brother of 2 years was in the United States Coast Guard, approximately the same time that I was in the United States Army. Was involved in drug interdiction missions down in Haiti and served out of Portsmouth, Virginia on, I can't remember the name of the cutter that he served on right now, but he served 2 years doing that, and he's now a police officer in Pennsylvania. My uncle, who is now deceased, was in the United States Navy, and one of my closest friends growing up was a Marine for a couple of years before I went into the service. So there was always this sort of military service in my family that was kind of talked about. I think I knew from the days of the Vietnam War. Vietnam was going on when I was a child. It ended in 1975 when I was 11, but right around that time I wanted to go into the military and I wanted to serve in Vietnam. The war ended, and then over the course of time I tried to enlist. Was going to go in the Navy when I was in high school, and my father asked me not to. He wanted me to graduate high school first, so I honored his wishes. And then one thing led to another between college and law school. I knew by the second year of law school that I wanted to go and serve in the military, and it was just a matter of which branch, and ultimately I decided on the United States Army.
Were you ROTC?
I was not ROTC. I was a direct commission as a result of being a lawyer.
Oh, I see. That's interesting.
So they did not pay for any of my schooling. This was just something that I had always wanted to do and ultimately was able to do it.
So you were commissioned to first lieutenant?
Commissioned to first lieutenant, and approximately 8 months later was promoted to captain.
Okay, and let's go through the locations where you were, starting with...
When I first went into
boot camp.
Well, we have what's called Officer Indoctrination School, so I spent 2 weeks at Fort Lee, Virginia. They try and cram what would normally take about 6 months into about 2 weeks. So for example, drill and ceremony, they gave us approximately 2 hours with the drill sergeant, and that was about it. After my 2 weeks in Fort Lee, I then went to Charlottesville, Virginia, where the Judge Advocate General School is. It's over at the University of Virginia, right next to the University of Virginia Law School. It is a self-contained building, so we resided there and we also took classes there. I was there for approximately 10 weeks. From there, I went to Fort Benning, Georgia, because at that point, I knew I was going to the 82nd Airborne, and those who were going to airborne units had to be airborne qualified. So I went down to Fort Benning, Georgia, and went through airborne training school.
Let me interrupt you. How did you come to know that you would be the 82nd Airborne?
I knew I wanted to go to the 82nd Airborne because when I graduated law school early in December of 1990. Shortly after that, the Persian Gulf War started, and I wanted to go to the Persian Gulf. So I did everything I could to try and process as quickly as I could. And during my study for the bar, I was watching CNN, and they were showing various clips of things in the Persian Gulf, and there was a group of men getting on a C-130 cargo plane, and they had backpacks and all sorts of cargo, and they said it was the 82nd Airborne. And one of the guys in line had turned to the camera, and he looked at him, and he said, "Light infantry?" with all this equipment that he had on him. And I just started laughing, and I said, "That's where I'm going, the 82nd Airborne." So ultimately, and it was an easy to get to the 82nd Airborne because most people don't want to go there. At least the judge advocates. They wanted to go to Germany, or they wanted to go to Fort Lewis in Washington, or Washington, D.C. They wanted sort of easy posts. I wanted something that was a little bit more challenging and being able to go to airborne school. So all I had to do was say I wanted to go to Fort Bragg, and they were like, "You're there."
So you mentioned Fort Benning?
Fort Benning is where I received my airborne training.
Okay.
How long were you in airborne training for?
It's 3 weeks. I went 2 weeks, and the last day of my second week, I came down with the flu. So I had to stop for a week while I was going to the infirmary, and as soon as I was done with that, I just picked up for that last week. So I was at Fort Benning for 4 weeks, but I was only actually in training for 3 because I got sick the 1 week.
As you moved, from place to place, were you kind of by yourself?
By the way, I'm not crying. This is my allergies, so I have a lot of cats at home.
Oh.
That's all it is.
That's funny.
But I'm sorry, what were you asking?
As you moved from place to place, you were kind of solo compared to units because you were JAG?
Well, in terms of the training, there were only 5 of us from my JAG class that went to Fort Bragg. I want to say most of them went to the 18th Airborne Corps, which had its own staff judge advocate office. And then I might have been the only one actually, either me or one other guy. I think in my class I was the only one going to the 82nd Airborne, and the other 3 or 4 went to the 18th Airborne Corps. So after graduating or finishing officer indoctrination school, we all kind of just had our own vehicles and drove over to the JAG school. We were there for 10 weeks, and then only 5 or 6 of us, there were some people that were going to Fort Benning who also had to go to airborne school. So I want to say there was maybe 5 or 6 of us from my class, which was approximately 30 or 40 people that went to airborne school. So we drove down there, we were given our quarters, spent our time there, and after we were done with airborne school, I then drove to Fort Bragg. And I'm pretty sure that I was the only one, now that I think about it, that went to the 82nd Airborne. So I simply reported for duty. I was assigned to the 82nd Airborne through headquarters and headquarters company, which was basically the staff that oversees the 82nd Airborne. So my building was located next to the commanding general, who at that time was General Shelton, who later became the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I was fortunate enough to meet him. He was an unbelievable general, just in terms of his physical presence and in terms of his intelligence and his military service. Many people may recall during the Persian Gulf War it was during 9/11, when George Bush had called upon the military. General Shelton basically got out in front of that camera and said, "Our armed forces are ready to go." And our office was located in the building right next to the commanding general's building. I was assigned to headquarters and headquarters company until the last 6 months until I was transferred to the Trial Defense Service. I was a judge advocate, which is a military lawyer. I started out in the legal assistance office, and within about 6 or 7 months, can't recall the exact time, but I was promoted to the chief of the legal assistance office, which is an office consisting of approximately 3 or 4 attorneys who serve approximately 15,000 soldiers in the 82nd Airborne with various matters, from wills to family law matters, dealing with various matters particular to the Army, such as reports of survey when there's damaged military items, and whether or not that soldier is required to pay for some portion of it if they're found to have been negligent or partially responsible. Again, we're going back a long way, so I don't remember exactly what the legal standard was. And then after being chief of the legal assistance office, I transferred over to the Trial Defense Service. That is your typical military court-martial. If you've ever seen the movie A Few Good Men,
Of course.
Those are trial defense attorneys. Tom Cruise obviously representing the defendant. That would be trial defense. The prosecutor was assigned to the staff judge advocate's office, and they're the ones that prosecuted the soldiers. So that there was no appearance of any impropriety or collusion, the trial defense attorneys were assigned to a different command. If they were assigned to the same command, there would be the perception, or at least the appearance, that the staff judge advocate, who oversees the whole office, could be saying to the prosecutor, you're going to be doing this, and to the defense attorney, you're going to be doing that. To avoid that situation, the defense attorneys were assigned to a different unit. For me, it was the Trial Defense Service. My commander was Colonel Smith, and I think he was located in Tennessee or Kentucky. And I was attached at that point to the 82nd Airborne. After being in trial defense approximately 6 months, I was then deployed overseas to the Multinational Force and Observers in the Sinai Desert, which is a peacekeeping mission that is set up to enforce the peace agreement between Israel and Egypt from the early 1970s, maybe 1972. There were 4 units that were assigned that particular mission, and they would rotate out every 6 months. One was the 82nd Airborne, another was the 101st Airborne Division, the 25th ID out of Hawaii, and the 10th Mountain Division out of New York.
Multinational peacekeeping?
Multinational Force, it was MFO, Multinational Force and Observers, and they were set up throughout the Sinai Desert, which is the buffer zone between Israel and Egypt. It's a very dangerous place right now, the Sinai Desert, because after Mubarak was taken down, where there was a dictator, I think he was called a president, but basically he was acting in the capacity of a dictator, and there tended to be a lot more order with him in. Once his reign ended, we know about the civil unrest, the Arab Spring, I think they called it. There still is, at this point, not a stable government in Egypt. I think it's the military that oversees the government at this point, but it became a haven, the Sinai, for terrorists and people who are not trying to do good. I can't tell you which specific groups. I don't know if it's Al-Qaeda or whoever, but from what I've read, it's not a very safe area right now. And in fact, in Sharm el-Sheikh, there was a major terrorist attack, an explosion that killed a number of people. And at the time that I was there in the 90s, in 1994, it was actually a very peaceful area. There was a lot of tourists from Europe because the Dead Sea is right along the Sinai Desert, and the snorkeling and scuba diving, I'm told, is incredible out there. I was fortunate enough only to snorkel, but I'm told like scuba diving is really incredible from what you see in the Dead Sea, or the Red Sea, I'm sorry.
How long were you in the Sinai for?
I was in the Sinai for approximately 6 months. I think I was supposed to be there beyond my expiration of term of service, and at that point I really wanted to get back to New Jersey and start looking for a job. So I was a little upset that I was selected so late to do this tour. I was more than happy to do it, but I didn't like the fact that it was going to be going beyond my expiration of term of service. You usually need about 7 to 10 days to outprocess because of all the stops that you have to make. And I felt like this was really going to be very difficult to do coming back late. But I was lucky. There was a I originally was under Colonel Dave Mattis, and then there was a change to another colonel, a change of command while I was over there. It was Colonel Marsalo, I think was his name, who was wonderful, as was Colonel Mattis, but I think his last name was Marsalo. And I remember he said to me when I was talking to him once at dinner that was unacceptable, that I should be allowed time to out-process. And he made it happen. He got me back about 2 weeks early and gave me about 7 to 10 days so that I was able to out-process and do things so that by the time that my actual term of service was going to expire, I went through the processing process and was able to get out on the date that I was originally assigned to get out. So they were going to have to extend me a couple of weeks, and so this made it a lot easier to be able to do it that way. So I was very appreciative of his efforts.
So each unit, as part of that, how long was their actual service in the Sinai?
It's a total of 6 months. Then at some point a few years later, I was told that they turned it over to the National Guard, and they were rotating guard units in and out of the Sinai. They may be back to regular Army units, but I'm not really sure about that. But my job over there were 2 of us that were deployed. There was a prosecutor that was deployed who was to handle anything on the prosecutorial end, as well as administrative matters. He had a little bit different of a role. He had to advise on operational matters, administrative matters, and legal matters, such as criminal matters. And my role was really to serve as the defense attorney for any Article 15s or any court-martials, courts-martial, or legal assistance matters. So the things that I had been doing were exactly what I was doing in the Sinai, except I had 2 jobs basically combined. And the things that the prosecutor was doing was basically what he had done back in the States that were kind of combined from 2 different jobs into one. And so the fact that I knew him very well from being in the same unit and working with him previously made it a lot easier to resolve whatever issues came up. But there were not a lot. This was a very disciplined unit, the 82nd Airborne. Maybe I had 1 person a day that I had to counsel, and the counseling was more about a question about a will or a tax law question or something like that. There were no courts-martial when I was there during the 6 months. There might have been 1 or 2 Article 15s, which is non-judicial punishment, where you go before a commander if you've done something wrong rather than an actual court-martial, and the commander becomes the judge or the jury and executioner, so to speak. But it's usually for minor type of infractions. If somebody was to commit a felony, then that would not be something that would be subject to an Article 15. But if they were to disobey an order, then that might be something that would be the subject of an Article 15 if it wasn't really that serious of an issue.
Can you talk about Article 15?
Article 15, I guess, is a reference to the United States Military Code, and it is a method of non-judicial punishment. It is a lengthy process, and it can be a costly process to court-martial someone, and it generally ends up with a discharge of some sort if they're convicted of a crime. It doesn't have to be. It could be a reduction in pay or rank or things of that sort. For sort of minor type offenses, they can institute, they being the command, Article 15 proceedings, which are much more expedited. You don't need a jury, you don't need a judge. It literally is the commander. It could be a captain, it could be a company commander that presides over the Article 15. The soldier has a right to present witnesses, to present evidence. I do not believe that they have a right to be represented at an Article 15, but they do have a right to seek counsel before an Article 15. So if they receive notice that there's an Article 15 proceeding against them, they would come into my office, I would sit down, I would counsel them and offer them legal advice, but ultimately they were on their own when it came to an Article 15 proceeding, and they could call witnesses that they want, present documentary evidence, and then ultimately the commander would decide what to do. One of the things, in the Sinai, there were 4 company commanders that I got to know, and I had the honor of being able to explain to them, my take of an Article 15, and I explained to them that when they're doing this, it shouldn't be, okay, the guy's guilty and now I have to determine what the punishment is. It should be, okay, he is innocent until proven guilty, so I'm going to listen to whatever evidence is presented, and then I'll make a determination as to whether I think this person is guilty of this offense. And if they are, then I'm going to make a determination as to what punishment I can give under Article 15. So it really is an expedited process in terms of time and money, and a way to deal with minor offenses rather than sending it through a court-martial system, which involves a judge. It involves much more legal rights, meaning you have to have counsel assigned, possibly a jury if they request a jury. So it is a way to kind of expedite the process of giving the person a fair hearing, and then if they're found guilty, punishing them, but in a much expedited and less costly way.
And it's non-judicial?
It's non-judicial punishment because it's not involving the court system. It's involving the company commander.
So they won't...
Generally, if it's a higher up, if it was a lieutenant or something like that, it would probably not be a company commander. It might be a battalion commander, or it could be a brigade commander.
So they wouldn't be sent to the brig?
I don't recall if jail was an option under Article 15. We're going back 25 years, so I really don't recall whether or not that was an option, whether they could go to jail. Certainly a reduction in rank was possible,
right.
A loss of pay, a confinement to barracks. Those were things that they could do under Article 15.
And then there's no appeal, right, if it's non-judicial? I would think no.
I don't believe
no
that there
appeal.
is a right of appeal on that.
Right.
I don't recall all that much. And then if the infraction was such that they felt that the person should no longer be in the military, they could institute what they call chapter proceedings, which is you chapter someone out, meaning it's an administrative discharge. A criminal discharge following a court-martial results in either a bad conduct discharge or what most people know of, a dishonorable discharge.
Right.
A administrative discharge is the one where you can have an other than honorable, which is sort of like a dishonorable, or you can have a general discharge under honorable conditions.
Like what about if they lose their mind while they're in service?
That's the old Section 8, if you remember MASH. I forgot the character's name, but he would dress in the ladies' clothes to try and get out under Section 8. Klinger, that's right. So that can happen. That would be an administrative type discharge. It could be honorable. It could be general under honorable conditions, or it could be other than honorable. In my time, I only had one administrative board proceeding which resulted in an other than honorable discharge, and from the defense perspective, that was a huge win. Forgetting all the moral aspects of it, just from the legal perspective, the person, this was before I went to the desert, the person had been charged with rape, basically. There was an Article 32 hearing, which is kind of like a preliminary hearing, and it was during that hearing the witness, or whatever witnesses the government intend to present, I have a right to cross-examine. So there were a number of questions that I asked her that kind of had me wondering, did she really identify my guy because of the circumstances? It was dark out. It was a very strange fact pattern. But at the end of the day, I don't know if the government was having problems with the witness or they felt that there were too many holes in her story. So instead of choosing to continue with a court-martial, and now we're kind of refreshing my memory, I think after the Article 32 hearing, what happens is charges are referred by the commanding general, and they'll determine whether or not to go to a court-martial. Instead, they offered him an administrative discharge as an other than honorable. Most people wouldn't really know what that means. They certainly would know what a dishonorable discharge is. So if he was convicted of rape and he was dishonorably discharged, everybody knows that. But they don't know what a general under honorable conditions is, or an other than honorable. But if you were in the military, especially if you were a lawyer, you know exactly what that means. It means they did something really bad. And so for this person, he avoided jail time, although he was kicked out of the Army under other than honorable conditions.
What other conditions could warrant that, other than honorable discharge?
That is a good question. I'm not sure that I could think of anything off the top of my head. Like a general discharge might be they could get a general discharge under honorable conditions. Let's say they're overweight or they've disobeyed an order or something to that effect. They could have a board hearing, and if they're found to have violated the Army provisions, they can give them a general under honorable conditions. Off the top of my head, I can't think of anything, because it usually means you've done something bad, and usually that results in a court-martial. And I'm just drawing a blank right now. I can't think of anything other than that one particular instance. It was the only time I ever represented somebody where the result was an other than honorable discharge. I have had many board hearings where the person, we won most of the board hearings, but I can't even think of if I lost one. I'm sure I must have lost one or two of the board hearings, and somebody was chaptered out for either under receiving an honorable discharge or an general discharge under honorable conditions. But I can't think of anything off the top of my head that would lead to an other than honorable, other than just the one case that I had, and that was because the alternative was a court-martial, which could result in jail time and which could result in a dishonorable discharge. So when somebody offers you no jail time and your client is willing to accept that, then that's what you do. And so he ultimately accepted that, and I assume went on with his life.
So a court-martial is a criminal case?
That's correct.
And first you have the trial level experience and then the appellate counsel?
You can appeal a determination from a court-martial. I did not work in the appellate division. There is a group of attorneys. I forgot what the acronym was, DAD or something like that. But they were attorneys that would handle appeals from people who were convicted at a court-martial. For both sides. One would be representing the government, one would be representing the individual who lost at the court-martial.
And then I saw in my research that you would advise the commanders of administrative and disciplinary measures short of a court-martial. Is that under appellate counsel?
No, that would have been as a judge advocate at the unit itself. The appellate counsel really just handles appeals from court-martial. I believe they were based out of Washington, D.C., where it used to be called the Court of Army Review was the first appeal level. They did change the name. I don't recall what it is right now, but it was called the Court of Army Review. And then you had a right, or you could appeal. I don't know if you had a right to appeal, but you could then appeal to the Court of Military Appeals, and then after that would be the United States Supreme Court. But they were separate counsel. That's all they did was handle appeals, and they were based, I'm pretty sure, out of Washington, D.C. I think that's where the appeals courts were. So had I stayed in, I think my aspiration would have been to be a judge, one of the military judges. So, but at that point, I mean, I was 30 years old, I was single, I was poor, so I'd spent a lot of money on law school, and they don't pay you a lot even as an officer in the Army, at least not back in the early 1990s. So I think at that point I really wanted to start a life in New Jersey and start making some money and maybe have a family, something like that. So.
That's very common for any...
Yes. Although most of the guys that I served with, I can think of 3 or 4 guys who I served with who stayed in and did a full career. One of them retired this year, another one last year, another one the year before that. So, and they all did well. I believe they were all 06s. They were all colonels when they retired. So.
And getting back to you, I feel like your service went back to age 11, right? Where it was a dream, and you lived your dream, and then you made your decision to keep going with other dreams.
Correct. That absolutely was a goal of mine. I think some people would have thought it was a little strange. I think most people were trying to avoid Vietnam, but for me, that was a place that I would have gone if the war was still going on by the time I turned 18. Ultimately, though, I knew that I wanted to go in the service. It was an absolute goal, and I did accomplish that goal, and I served honorably, and I'm glad that I did, and it was what I call one chapter of my life.
Right. And you also mentioned State Trooper?
I did start processing at some point to be a state trooper. I had passed the written exam and passed the physical, which actually was held at this facility.
Was that the first time that you applied? Or-
First time I had applied, yes.
Okay.
I had been working as a lawyer for maybe a year and a half. I was engaged to be married, and I had just decided that I really didn't like the practice of law. I was doing insurance defense at the time. I was putting in a lot of hours. I was going to work. Commuting from Plainsboro, New Jersey, up to Edison, New Jersey. It took me almost an hour, and getting to work at like 8 o'clock in the morning and working till 7 o'clock at night, 5 days a week. And I just decided this is just too much. So I decided I was going to try a career change. My brother at that point was looking for a job as a police officer, and I saw that they had had the test for the New Jersey State Troopers, so I took the test, received a packet saying, okay, next up is physical. Came down here and did the physical, which went well because of all the running you do in the Army, and it was something that I carried on afterwards. So out of, I think it was a group of about 50 in the run, I was number 2 coming in.
Wow. How old were you?
I would have been 30 or 30, well, I got out, I said 31 or 32.
That's
And,
amazing, right?
It was a difficult run, don't get me wrong. So maybe it was just I got lucky because it was August. It was the hottest day of the year. And it was humid as could be. And I can't say I was feeling very good after that run. And then, of course, you have to go and you do push-ups and sit-ups and things like that. So I was just in really good shape. One of the things about the Army is, especially the 82nd Airborne, they keep you in very good shape. 6:30 PT, which is physical training, running. We played soccer a lot. After we would run or after we would do soccer, a couple of us would go to the gym and we would lift weights. So, when I was 6 months overseas in Egypt, because I really didn't have a lot to do in terms of my job, I had a lot of time off, so I traveled a lot. I was also responsible for North Camp. Mostly I was at South Camp, which is down in Sharm el-Sheikh in that area. North Camp is in the northern part of the Sinai, so I was also responsible for that and would take a trip up there once every couple of weeks to deal with any issues that were up there. But I did have a lot of time to work out and do things like that, so they had good equipment at the gym and I was in really good shape. So I got out at about 30, and it was only a year and a half later that I started processing for the troopers, so I had kept up that running and lifting regime. So passed that, and then received some additional papers so they could do the background check. It was a very thick application. And that's when my wife and I had a serious talk, or I think she was my fiance at the time, and it was decided, she kind of begged me, not to be a state trooper. So I decided against it for her sake, and ended up just getting back into the practice, or staying with the practice of law, just switching from defense to doing plaintiff's work, representing injured people and injured workers, things like that.
And you're still doing that, right?
Still doing that today, just with a different firm.
I saw your website.
I've been at the same firm now for 10 years, but at that time I was with a different firm that I ended up staying with almost 8 years, and then made some changes in between.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you have any really good, memorable cases or anything that from either being home or in the Sinai?
One of my most memorable cases was a 19-year-old from Michigan who was accused of rape. And there was a court-martial brought against him. It was a local girl from Fayetteville, North Carolina. And I felt like this was just an innocent kid who just made a mistake picking this one particular woman. She was young too. I think he was 19 and she was 18 or 19 as well. Local, not military. And he met her at a McDonald's, and they went on a date, and they went back to the barracks, and I believe, as the jury believed, that they had consensual sex. She stayed around for a while and then ultimately left. And when she got home, she started crying, and her sister said, "What happened?" And she said, "I was raped." In a rare move, the judge allowed me to get the records from her psychologist, and the records showed that she had been complaining about a lack of attention in her family. Her younger sister was in a beauty pageant, and so her parents were, all excited about that. Her older sister just had a baby, and was getting all this attention, and the records were replete with her not getting attention. Once the rape allegation was made, the family rallied around her, and she got all the attention that she wanted. We had to try this. The judge would not permit me to introduce the records from the psychologist, which I felt were extremely relevant because they showed a motive for saying something that perhaps wasn't true. It was the same guy that I served in Egypt, in the Sinai, who was prosecuting the case. I felt like it was going well, that I did a good job on cross-examination of their witness. They brought in, I think, the grandmother. I vaguely remember them bringing in someone to talk about a phone call that she had made. And I kind of took this person through, I can't even remember, but there wasn't much to the phone call. I can't even remember what the substance of it was, but there wasn't much to it. And I kept, on cross-examination, I think it was her grandmother, and I was very nice about it, but I said, and you got a lot of phone calls. Here she was testifying about something. She hadn't been asked about it until 6 months later. And it was like, how could you remember this sort of benign phone call? So after the cross-examination of the complainant and her grandmother, I, in a rare move, put my client on the stand. Actually, I can't remember now if I put my client on the stand, but I remember that it was going very well, and we decided not to call some witnesses that we had lined up because we thought it was a clean case. The jury can understand kind of what's going on here, and that was another thing. I was taking her through the time period when she was in the room, that she had been in there even after he had allegedly raped her. She didn't leave. She stayed around for like almost another hour, then walked with him to the car, let him drive her home instead of saying, I'm out of here, and calling her parents or something like that. And so I felt like we had enough, that we didn't really need to put all these other witnesses on. And so sure enough, it was amazing because we tried this case, I think, in one day. We started at like 8 o'clock in the morning. The jury finally came back with a verdict at about 1:30 at night. And the verdict was not guilty. And it was like a sigh of relief. The other side, obviously, she was very upset, and she got up and she screamed, "You're all going to pay. I'm going to make you pay." And the father was very upset, and so the prosecutor had to take them outside. The judge had me take my client out the back way. His company commander said, none of this happened in my mind. You got a clean slate. We're starting all over again. So there was a sense of relief because the jury didn't even hear the evidence about the psychologist, but they still found him not guilty. Had they found him guilty, he would have gone to jail for years. This was a 19-year-old kid from Michigan. So that was one of the most gratifying cases I ever handled to this day, because I felt like justice really had been served. The injustice, I guess you could say, out of it was about 3 months later, he was in my office, he got caught smoking pot. So he ended up getting chaptered out. That's one of the offenses that they'll chapter you out of the military. I don't think that was an other than honorable, though. I think that was a general under honorable conditions that he got. But it was like he finally got a clean slate. He got this weight of the world off him, and then he does something stupid and he smokes pot in the military, which you just cannot do. And so I was very disappointed when I saw him in my office again, and I had to counsel him. I think it was on Article 15, and then ultimately that he got chaptered out of the military. But at least he was not in jail for years and years for something that I truly believed he did not do. So that was probably the most gratifying case that I had when I was in the Army.
I'm curious, how did you know she had a psychologist?
I don't remember. We're going back to 1992. I really don't remember how I got that information.
Did you have private investigators?
We were allowed to request investigators. I don't think I did in this particular case. I don't think I needed it. But again, we're going back a long way. I only remember kind of the highlights. I don't really remember the specifics of everything I did in preparation for that case.
Or she could have told him, and he would have told you, right?
Or they may have told the prosecutor, but somehow I ultimately found out about it, and I had to, through the court, get an order to be able to get those records, which the judge did give me. But ultimately, he would not allow me to introduce them into evidence, even when I felt they were critical. So that would have been a potential appellate issue.
Oh, okay.
So, at the end of the day, it didn't matter because he was found not guilty.
Is that unusual for nowadays? Would that be politically incorrect if a judge let you get medical records?
No, not necessarily.
Oh.
The same thing could happen today.
Oh, okay.
That what you're permitted to obtain in discovery is not necessarily what you're allowed to use at trial. The rules are much broader in terms of what you can get in terms of discovery, and then the rules of evidence say what you're actually allowed to introduce. I think the judge felt that the prejudicial effect outweighed the probative value, but I don't know that he was looking at the case from my perspective. And to me, the probative value far outweighed any prejudicial effect or any other concerns that there may have been. The judge at the time was Colonel Peter Brownback, who was one of my favorite people ever. I loved Judge Brownback. He ultimately retired as a colonel. He was himself in an infantry, either infantry or he might have been armor, but he was what we call a triple tabber. So he had a Ranger tab, an Airborne tab, and a Special Forces tab.
Wow.
Plus, on his other shoulder, he had the patch from being in service in Vietnam with the 173rd Airborne. So anyone that crossed his path, even the members of the jury, when they saw that, were very impressed with this particular judge. After 9/11, and we had Guantanamo Bay, and we had the prisoners down there, he was asked to serve as a special judge. And I remember reading something about, ultimately they decided to remove him as a judge, I think because he was being fair. And he was being open-minded about this,
okay.
and I'm not so sure under the Bush administration they really appreciated that. They had these people in Guantanamo, and they didn't want them to be let out. There was a reason they were holding them, and I don't think they appreciated that he was more concerned about due process and legal rights than necessarily just keeping them there so that they don't commit violent acts elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, after I left the service, I never saw him again. He retired down to Florida. I kept telling him that someday I was going to be governor, and when I was governor, I would make him a judge. And he said, I don't do up. And I said, what do you mean by that? He goes, I don't do higher than North Carolina. I don't do up that high. So.
Huh. Our captain who showed you around, she served in Gitmo.
Oh, she served in Gitmo? Oh, I didn't know
Yeah.
that. That's very interesting.
And we have the Public Affairs office here today, the 44th or 144th MPAD, the Mobile Public Affairs Detachment, because of National Guard Youth Camp Week.
Oh, okay. Yeah, she was saying there was a lot of kids walking
Mhm.
around.
And the head of that, he was with her at Gitmo too.
I don't think most people realize that there are a lot of Army lawyers. There are a lot of lawyers in all branches of service because there are a lot of potential legal issues that come up, besides all of the potential criminal issues. And one of the things that I didn't mind all that much in terms of serving as what is the equivalent of a federal public defender as a trial defense attorney is everyone that came into my office when they were accused of a crime was a first-time offender. If I was in New Jersey and working for the public defender's office, I think I would be appalled by some of the people that were accused of crimes because of their past history, people with very long rap sheets who just have no respect for the law. And I might have some difficulty representing them. I get it, everybody's entitled to legal rights, due process and all that, but they're not entitled to have David Lande necessarily represent them. And so I don't know that I would necessarily have been able to do that. But that was one of the things I liked about the Army was, even at trial defense, was everyone I was representing was a first-time offender. They had never been, convicted of anything before. So, and there were always challenges involved, which I particularly liked in terms of finding various legal issues and things of that sort. One of the funniest moments I had was when I was arguing a motion. It was, again, the same guy that I went to Egypt with. He had charged a client of mine with attempted assault. It was either attempted assault or attempted battery. And I think it was attempted assault. the definition of assault under the Uniform Code of Military Justice is an attempted battery, meaning you're attempting to hit someone. So I had made a motion to dismiss the charge saying you can't charge someone with an attempt to make an attempt at a battery. And I had 3 cases. I had one out of Colorado, one out of Utah, and one out of California. And I'm arguing this before Judge Brownback, Colonel Brownback. And he listens to my argument and he shakes his head and he says, "Captain Lande, are we in Utah right now?" And I said, "No." He said, "Are we in California?" I said, "No." He said, "Are we in Colorado?" I said, "No." He goes, "Then I don't find any of those cases to be binding or even precedent in this case." So he said, "Captain Crawford, do you wish to amend your charge to be assault instead of attempted assault?" And Captain Crawford was like, "Yeah, I'd like to do that, Judge." So I lost the motion, but it really was kind of funny. It was one of those things where I just was so detail-oriented because of my training in the Army and picking those things out, and then made this motion, which the judge found to be interesting, but at the end of the day, I think he was not going to let someone basically off on what was, a potentially serious charge. So that was kind of interesting, that particular one. That's one of those memories that I have that still stands out. And then afterwards, every Friday afternoon, we would go to the officers club, and Colonel Brownback would be there, and we would joke about certain things, and that was one of the things that we joked about. So I still remember it to this day.
Where were some of the places you traveled? You said you had a lot of time off?
When I was in Egypt, I was fortunate enough to be able to travel around Egypt. So I was able, in the Sinai desert, you have Mount Sinai, where Moses is alleged to have seen the burning bush. So I was able to travel out there. And that was one of the great things about Colonel Mattis out there, was making sure that all the soldiers got to sort of the main holy sites. So it was a requirement for everyone that was over there, and there was about 500 guys, to go to Mount Sinai at some point during their 6 months that they were there. So I was able to go to Mount Sinai in the desert. Was able to go to Egypt with then Lieutenant Curtis, Lance Curtis, who is now a full bird down in Fort Bragg, and but he was my travel partner back then. And we went to Alexandria and went out to El Alamein, where Rommel lost in the desert in Egypt, that big famous battle. And they have a couple of memorials and cemeteries there, which was very interesting. And then, of course, to, I'm drawing a blank here, Cairo, where they had the pyramids, and that was another requirement. Everybody had to go see the pyramids. He wasn't going to let everybody fly thousands of miles, I think it was like a 16-hour flight to Egypt, and not take in certain sites. So that was a requirement as well, that they go and see the pyramids. So that was another trip that I took while I was out there. So we got to see the pyramids, we traveled around Cairo, and then also Israel was right there. And North Camp was only a 2-hour bus drive, and the buses were free. And we had diplomatic passports. So when you got up to the border with Eilat in Israel, for example, or if you were going to Tel Aviv, where they had the big line for everybody with the passports, they had a just real small line for those with diplomatic passports. So it was real nice. So we were able to kind of zip in and out. And so I spent a week in Eilat, which is a beach that they have in Israel. I was in Tel Aviv a couple of times, in the Jordan Valley, where there were some historical stories about the areas that I was in. For example, where Jesus is reported to have taken one fish and turned it into 5,000 fish. I don't know all of the religious story behind it, but just kind of the general concept.
Loaves and fishes.
Yeah. And then in Jerusalem, we were able to go to Jerusalem a couple times and went to the Old City and the places where Jesus was born, where Jesus died. And there were 2 places that they alleged. One is a church that they are now refurbishing, and everybody kind of claims that as like a holy place for them, but that's where the slab was. There were, what was it, the 16 points or 18 points from Jesus' last walk with the cross,
Yeah.
when he was bearing the cross.
Oh, the Stations of the
Via
Cross?
Yeah, Stations of the Cross, exactly. So I was able to walk the Stations of the Cross. Can't remember the names of them. Mount Olive, I think, was one of the cemeteries that we visited. But there were a number of places that we went in Jerusalem. I have a ton of pictures, I just can't remember the particular places now. But Israel was a good opportunity where I got to travel all over Israel. I think I spent probably, it was either 26 or 28 days traveling altogether. It was a weekend in Tel Aviv here and there, a weekend in the Jordan Valley, going to the Dead Sea and laying in the Dead Sea where you literally have, you float in the
Yeah,
Dead Sea because of the
salt
density of the salt, exactly. So that
And
was kind
is
of
that
interesting.
very healthy? A lot of people go there.
Supposedly they say that, and they sell all sorts of mud and cosmetics. They have the mud treatments and stuff like that. So that's what they say. But I believe there is an environmental problem with the Dead Sea. I think it is drying up.
Oh.
It is shrinking. So I don't know how much longer it'll be there.
No, I'm curious, like, I would love to see a bunch of those Holy Land sites, but if that were today to be required to go there, would that even fly today, or?
I think you would be okay today. I don't think it's as bad as people think it is.
No, I mean, like, having your colonel requiring everyone to go there today.
Well, as so long as it was not off limits. I don't remember if Israel was one of the requirements. Certainly in Egypt, I remember the pyramids were one of the requirements, and the Mount Sinai was a requirement. There was one more that I'm just drawing a blank on. We were not permitted to go to Jordan, though. And Jordan was right there on the other side of the Red Sea, and I really wanted to go there, but for some reason that was off limits for U.S. Army soldiers. So Eilat was a lot of fun. That was a nice place to get away for R&R. That might have been the other requirement, was Eilat. Everybody had to go to the beach because it was close to the Sinai and close to North Camp. It was only like a 2-hour drive. And so for R&R, that's kind of where people would go. And we had a joke once because I went with, there was a doctor on post who was a young guy who was about my age from New Jersey. And there was a dentist as well. And so I went to Eilat with the doctor and the dentist, so it was like 3 soldiers, a doctor, a dentist, and a lawyer went to Eilat. We just couldn't come up with a punchline, but we thought that was kind of funny. And I remember sitting at the bar, we were having a couple of beers out in this beautiful weather, away from the camps, and this was 1994, and I had my term of service card. It said 1994. And the doctor had his card, and I want to say his term of service was like 2002 that it ended. And it was because he went through medical school, paid for by the Army, and then did his residency, that he owed so many years to the Army. So I remember the dentist and I started laughing so hard, our stomachs were hurting, because we couldn't fathom getting out in 2002 when here we are in 1994. He still had 8 more years commitment after he'd already been in several years. But he was a good guy. He was from New Jersey, I remember that. And, you know, by the time his term of service was going to end, I assume he probably stayed in the military. Because by the time he finished all his commitment, he probably had 12 or 14 years in. And the doctors tend to rise up much quicker. So by the time he was coming towards the end, I'm sure he was a colonel at that point. And he was a captain-like guy, but he was going to be a major fairly quicker than I would have been a major. It would have taken me several years to be a major. His was coming up fairly quickly because of the fact that he was a doctor and they wanted, you know, as an incentive to keep him in. They bump him up in rank. Rank has its privileges, more money, better housing, things of that sort. So.
Plus, the war on terror was 01.
That was 01, correct.
Right.
So, and that may have prompted him to stay in as well to serve, you know, continue serving. I really don't know. I lost track with him a long time ago. So.
Is there anybody who you kept in touch with?
There's a couple of guys, you know, I probably talk to them maybe once every year or two, you know, not very often anymore. One was Captain Black by then. He's one of the guys that's retiring this year. I think I spoke with him about 6 months ago, but we've kept in touch over the years. Another was Colonel Ingrao, who retired. He had transitioned from the Army. He was from Michigan. His wife was from Michigan. And I don't know how he got the gig, but he ended up being the judge advocate in New Jersey for the New Jersey National Guard. He decided it was too much to continue. He ended up he had one older child and he had 5 with his wife. And so it was just too much, I think, for them every 3 years to pick up and rotate. And that was the negative of the Army, was every 3 or 4 years you're going somewhere else. There are some people that like that, and kids that grew up being Army brats enjoyed that. But if you're looking to establish a career in the law and you don't necessarily want to be in the Army, it's kind of tough to pick up every couple of years. Or if you have a family that really isn't interested in that, picking up and leaving every 3 years, and it could be overseas, it could be across the country. So I think he just decided I want to kind of homestead a little bit. So he transitioned to the National Guard in New Jersey, and still resides in New Jersey. He resides in Tabernacle, New Jersey. He currently works for the department, I think the Department of the Army, but something in a civilian capacity. He's retired military, now working in a civilian capacity. I understand he goes to DC 4 days a week and then comes back home for 3 days a week. So not sure how long he's going to do that, especially with the 5 kids. It's a lot on his wife, to raise those kids. They're all older now, fortunately, but I keep in touch with him, from time to time. We had a mutual friend the last time I spoke with him who, unfortunately took his life down in Puerto Rico. He was a military vet. Was a very good guy, but just had some issues, I think, with some family issues with his son. And it must have just been overwhelming. So I had gotten a call from him saying, or maybe I called him to let him know. I think he was a lawyer, so I knew through circles. I had heard about it and was just stunned. I mean, absolutely stunned. He was such a good guy. And I think I called Gene to let him know. And then from time to time, I'll speak with him. Have not heard from Dave Crawford in a while. I have been meaning to reach out from him. That was the one that I served with in Egypt, where he was the prosecutor and I was the defense attorney. But I did hear that he had, through Colonel Black, who I keep in touch with, that he had retired last year. He had a couple of kids. So at some point I'll reach out to Mike Black and say, can you give me Dave's number? I want to reach out to him, see how he's doing, and talk about some old times. So we had some good times at Fort Bragg. Really enjoyed that. It was all a bunch of young single guys and just really, enjoying ourselves, enjoying our time. We were all in good shape, and I really enjoyed my service, the time that I did in the service. So.
Sounds like it, yeah. Do you belong to any veteran groups?
I don't. Jeff Cantor, who is running for sheriff in Monmouth County, I've been trying to get involved. Last year I got involved with a nonprofit called the Light It Up Foundation, and the goal was to raise money to put veterans through a treatment plan that was non-traditional. That what we were finding, or what the research was finding, was the traditional treatment for veterans who are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder and certain neurological conditions is not effective. That talk therapy and medications, which is sort of the routine course, even in the civilian world, is not really helping them that much. And so the Light It Up Foundation with the University of Rochester was putting together a treatment plan that involved some traditional Western medicine, but involved mindful-based meditation, which research is showing really helps, and yoga. And so I had gotten involved with this nonprofit. Ultimately, the cost of the treatment program, it was around $16,500 per vet. We could not make it happen. So we had about 25 people sign up, but we were just never able to get the program going. It is still a work in progress. The Light It Up Foundation is no longer associated with them. It is now solely through the University of Rochester. And so that's still kind of a work in process. They have the program down to about $10,000. And it also involves a retreat that they go away on for a couple of days up at Beaver Hollow outside of Buffalo, which is where they filmed The Biggest Loser, the TV show where people lose weight. And not too much has really happened on that. I know it's still evolving. But more recently, through getting involved locally with politics and things of that sort, I have come to know Jeff Cantor, Colonel Jeff Cantor, who's in the reserve. and he's also running for the Monmouth County Sheriff. And he himself has a program where he counsels about 25 vets. He received a grant from the VA, and he's basically like a wellness coach. And so what I did was I took some of the people involved in the Light It Up Foundation, and I took Jeff, and we met for lunch one day. And there was sort of an agreement that maybe we could make something work here. And so we're still kind of trying to work that out. It's just that one of the people from the Light It Up Foundation got sidetracked a little bit because he's doing a documentary. He had gotten a call from somebody who had been involved down at Ground Zero after 9/11, and now is dying as a result of carcinogens or whatever it is that he inhaled, and wanted to do a kind of documentary saying what's happened to the people at 9/11, because many of the people that he worked with are dead.
Wow.
From diseases that they contracted through their work at Ground Zero. So they were doing a bus tour, and this is, John Stewart is involved in this as well. So they were doing a bus trip, picking up guys along the way, going back up to Ground Zero, essentially. And so that is currently being filmed, so there was a little bit of a sidetrack there. But ultimately, you know, my goal is to find a way to help disabled veterans, particularly PTSD and traumatic brain injuries and things of that sort, because I do believe in yoga. I do it myself. And I'm not so much into the mindful-based meditation. I don't know that I have the, the focus to do that. I think I can do it at home, but then as soon as I go to work, I have so many clients. I have literally hundreds of clients with constantly being bombarded with questions and problems and things like that. That's very difficult to focus. But I truly believe in the yoga. And the program we're trying to put together is basically one that involves yoga and mindful-based meditation. And Jeff Cantor, Colonel Cantor, in his program, thinks that's a good idea, is to integrate the yoga, and that a lot of guys would be interested in that. One of the veterans we worked with was a guy named C.J. Keller, who was in New Jersey and offered free yoga classes to veterans down in Maple Shade. He has since relocated out to Utah. He's a former vet. He was a Marine Corps captain who had served in Iraq, who himself had suffered from PTSD and had some issues that he had to deal with relating to that, including what ultimately happens is it leads to other issues like alcoholism and drug abuse and things of that sort. So he's had some demons that he's had to deal with, and what he's always wanted to do is to give back and try and help people as well. So he's recently relocated to Utah. He finally got that job with the VA where he's helping disabled vets. So he was all kind of part of what we've been trying to do in the group of people that I've been trying to do. The hardest thing really is, because everybody has other projects going on, is kind of getting everybody together, getting the focus, and then of course money. Money is always the issue. It's been the issue with the Light It Up Foundation, with the University of Rochester program, with even Jeff Cantor has a grant, but at some point that grant may run out. So what is going to be the next source of money? Is it going to be another grant perhaps from the VA? So what we were hoping to do is put 50 guys through his program, because that's what he's slotted for. Right now he only has 25. And his program, as I said, I think I explained, was as a life or a wellness coach. What that basically means is he's helping them in all aspects of their life, whether it's getting care through the VA, nutrition, and things of that sort. So certainly the more people he has with knowledge and can provide certain services, the better off those veterans are going to be. But there are a ton of veteran groups out there that are run by veterans, nonprofits, designed to help veterans, because we know that the VA's program is not working. It just is not working.
Does Jeff try to get them off the medications?
I don't know that he necessarily does that, because that's really something that has to be done by the clinician. So if the therapist or a doctor feels that they should not be on medications, I think that's a goal, certainly.
Yeah.
I don't know that he tells them at some point you need to wean off. That he would do through the professionals, but certainly that's a goal. I mean, the goal is to get them to literally pass the issues that they're having, the memory issues, the trauma part of it, from one side of the brain to the other. Because on the one side, you experience the emotional component of it, and that's what leads to drug abuse and things of that sort. When you get it to the other side, it becomes a memory that doesn't have that emotional attachment. And so that, that's the ultimate goal.
Yeah.
And if you can do that, then you don't need the medications anymore. You can work through that issue without feeling the emotion from the memory.
And how do you do that?
Well, one of the ways they're trying to do that is through mindful-based meditation. There is a treatment, a traditional Western medicine treatment, psychological, I think it's called it's a 4-letter acronym, EMDR or something like that, where what they're doing, it has to do with the eyes going back and forth, and they make you follow something with your eyes. The woman who developed it had suffered a trauma, and it was fortuitous that something with her eyes, I don't remember the whole story, but that led to her saying, oh my God, I might be onto something here. And now it's in the textbooks about a potential treatment for that. So ultimately, I think what will benefit the veterans is some traditional medicine. I don't think you throw that out the door, but I think non-traditional medicine too you can add in. Holistic approaches, mindful-based meditation, nutrition, eating healthier, staying away from alcohol and drugs, yoga, things of that sort. Pilates, it could be anything, just get them moving. There are groups out there, one down in, I think, South Carolina, that offers farming to vets who are disabled and suffering from PTSD. We know Chris Kyle, who was killed at a gun range, and he brought that veteran to that gun range to get him away from the environment, to give him something different to deal with his emotional and psychological problems. In the end, it cost Chris his life, but he was trying to do what a lot of veterans out there are already doing. There's a guy down in Burlington County, a guy named Matt Bailey, who's a former Marine, who himself was dealing with various issues, and he formed a nonprofit with somebody else, and what they do is they try and get these guys together who went through the trauma at the time. So what happens is when you rotate out of the military, you don't always keep in touch. In fact, most people don't keep in touch with the people that they were in with, maybe one or two. So what he was trying to do is, if let's say somebody lost a leg from an IED, and there was a medic that came over to help him, and now that medic has problems, or he has problems, he tries to bring them together on a retreat out in Montana in the hopes of maybe they can work through whatever that issue is. And there seems to be a lot of success with those type of programs. And there's lots of them. I know of one down in Texas, in Houston. I'm sure if I did a Google search, I'd probably find 30 or 40 of them or more. There's a woman in Maryland who takes them out on retreats for a week, takes disabled veterans or people suffering from PTSD. They go out on a retreat. They're in a relaxed environment. You don't have, cell phones and TVs and electronic devices and people, reaching. It's just a completely relaxed environment to kind of refocus on life and purpose, and you get to talk to people who are going through the same thing as you. So that's kind of where I'm transitioning right now, and what I would like to do more of is help veterans. I think I'm a little disappointed that some of these programs I've been involved with haven't really evolved to where I would have liked to have seen them, where we're actually have vets going through, getting a benefit from them, and then being able to go to the VA and saying, you guys, your programs are failing. There are other programs that are more effective. Why don't you consider funding these programs? Here's the white paper, here's the statistics, the research showing this stuff works. So that's kind of what I'm doing on the side in addition to my day job, as they say.
That's beautiful.
There's also Greg's group.
I was thinking of that. Yeah. We have a veteran who you'll probably meet at the luncheon in the fall, because he was just interviewed this year as well. And he takes, just like you said, PTSD and TBI veterans, and he teaches them fishing and crabbing.
Exact concept,
Yeah.
Yep.
This whole room was filled with tables of veterans learning crabbing, and we have pictures I could show you. And I'll share his information with you.
That's fabulous. I mean, that's exactly the kind of programs that we need. And I think the hardest thing is getting the word out to veterans that these programs are available, and also getting the veterans to take the affirmative act of getting involved and doing some of these programs. What I liked about the program with the University of Rochester is It wasn't a situation where you take somebody, you take them out on a retreat for 3 or 5 days, and then they go back home and that's the end of it. Their program actually followed the veteran. They were involved in telemedicine, where the veteran was going to get, if they didn't already have access to a computer or an iPad, they would be given one, and access to the internet, so that wherever they lived in the country, they would be able to access the doctors at the University of Rochester. And in fact, the doctors would follow up with them periodically, a month later, 3 months later, and provide medical treatment if necessary, psychological counseling or what have you, where possible, and basically follow them for a year so that they didn't fall necessarily into old habits. That creates other issues, though, legal issues, such as if a doctor is in New York and a patient is in California, can the doctor practice medicine through telemedicine in California? Or do they have to be licensed in California in order to treat that patient in California? So there are a number of legal issues, which is, I guess, is why I got involved, perhaps to help them if those kind of things came up. So we'll see, ultimately where that goes. But there are a ton of these groups that are out there, and it's really just a matter of getting the word out, but more importantly, getting funding. These groups need money to be able to do this stuff. And so fundraising is, always challenging anytime you're asking people for money. So that always seems to be, a number one priority, is how do you get the money to fund these retreats and these projects and things like that. So,
Well, like you said, get the word out.
and you get the word out too.
Corporations, banks, whatever business donors could.
True,
Hear
but
about it and then
so many
know.
people go to the banks and businesses and things
Oh,
like that,
okay.
that you really have to have a white paper that specifies exactly what you're looking for. They have to believe that it's worthy, and it has to be, within sort of their budget, because they have a lot of people coming at them asking for corporate donations and things like that. So it would be nice if you could just go to a bank and say, hey, I got this great program, you'll have to believe in it because it's veterans, but there may be 10 other veteran groups, or there may be leukemia patients, or whatever condition or nonprofit that's out there, abused spouses or things like that. So everybody's competing against each other for a limited flow of dollars, unfortunately. So
That's a legal term, right? White paper?
white paper, exactly. It's just a summary of what the program is that you're offering. So I don't know if it's a legal term, it's just,
And then
that's what they
how is
call it.
How is it usually distributed?
When I say white paper, it's not necessarily that the paper is white. It literally is just a summary of what your program is. So, for example, the Light It Up Foundation and what we were doing, we had a white paper. So if we were going to approach the Army and say, we've got this program that's going to help your vets, we would have a 3 or 4 page white paper that outlined exactly what our mission is, how we were going to accomplish that mission, and what we were looking for. There always has to be an ask. And so we would provide them with that white paper, because they would always ask, well, you got a white paper on it? And we had talked to some people down in Houston. One of the people we were working with through the Light Up Foundation knew the corporate director or somebody who was high up in the city of Houston. And we were talking about, this program that we could offer, because it wasn't just for veterans, it was actually for first responders as well. So we were talking about how we could help the first responders and
You
through
mean
the program.
traumatized
Correct.
responders?
Right. With first responders, what happens a lot is, certainly in New Jersey, is if they're traumatized, and the trauma, depending on how they're traumatized, if they're in a fight with somebody for their life, and maybe they get shot or they kill somebody, and now they're traumatized by this, they can apply for and probably receive an accidental disability retirement pension. What that means is they are no longer able to do their job as a police officer, and they become disabled for purposes of receiving a disability pension through the state. And what we were saying is, when that happens, you lose an officer with all of these years of experience. You now are paying him at 2/3 of what his salary was, plus he gets medical insurance, and you have to bring someone else in who's now going to fill that position, who has to be trained, who has to be paid, who has to get benefits. We're offering you something saying you don't necessarily have to have that officer or that firefighter pension out. We're offering you a treatment program that we believe will allow them to deal with that trauma, to be able to get back to work. And that in the long run, that's going to be a huge cost savings for you. New Jersey, it's a little bit different because our firefighters, our policemen, they may work for a municipality, they may work for a sheriff's department or a county police, but ultimately they're in the state pension system, the police and fire. So if they're a municipal police officer and they can't do that job anymore and they pension out, that's the term they use, they go into the state system. They're no longer the municipal, they're not being paid by the municipality. In Houston, though, it's Houston that pays that disability pension. And then they'll pay the new salary of the person that has to replace them. So that kind of interested them a little bit. But ultimately, they needed more information, and of course, there was the cost that was involved. So that never quite panned out, but it was, one of the people that we had approached last year as part of the program that we had put together. So
Jeff Canner got the grant from the VA. Was that federal VA?
yes, my understanding is that it was a federal VA grant, and he's using that grant to deal solely with these 25 veterans. Ultimately, though, I wanted to get another 25, and I am still going to do that. My biggest problem is I am a workers' compensation attorney in New Jersey, and I literally have hundreds of files. So time is my biggest thing. Even now, like coming here and doing this,
I
it
wanted
was
to
like...
say thank you for making the time.
I had to schedule it out a couple of weeks, and that's the biggest thing. So I've approached my partners and said, look, there are other things that I want to do, not just outside of, but even within the business. And so I'm looking to hire somebody else so that I have more time to be able to do some of these other things, including the projects that I want to with the veterans. But right now, I'm just shorthanded and overwhelmed, so it's very difficult for me to devote outside time for those type of things. But as soon as we figure out what direction our firm is going to go, and we're kind of at that crossroads, so a couple of the partners and I will be meeting and saying, what do we want to do? Do we want to narrow what we're taking in terms of cases, or do we want to bring on more attorneys to help us with these cases? My partners and I now we're all in our 50s, and we just can't keep the pace that we were doing when we were in our 30s and 40s. So I'm hoping that shortly we'll be able to figure out what direction the firm's going to go in, and that will free up some time so that I can leave, to do things relative to helping the veterans. But that certainly is one of the things I want to do, and that all goes back to my initial military service. I feel like I do have a little bit of insight. I know what these people went through. I was not a combat veteran, but I think I have an idea what that must have been like, and so I can certainly relate to what they're going through, and any way that I can help them through contacts that I may have, through these different programs that I can get involved in. One of the programs I want to get involved in is New Jersey offers veterans legal assistance. I only recently found out about that when I was in Toms River in the municipal court representing somebody, and the judge came out and said, if you're a veteran, there's this program. It was like, I knew nothing about that. So that's something that I will be looking into when I have a little bit more time. Now, of course, I'm dealing with vacations, staff vacations. My associate's on vacation this week, and then the next couple of weeks my secretaries will be on vacation. So hopefully by the beginning of September I can kind of put some plans in motion to do some things that maybe help some veterans out. So.
Well, thank you for sharing all of this. And of course, the veterans are so lucky to have you in their corner.
I appreciate that. I mean, I really wish that I've done more to help veterans. I'm sort of on the behind the scenes right now trying to put some things together, but I kind of fault myself for not really being out there even more trying to help them, because they really do need help. And right now, obviously, police and fire are kind of in the news, particularly the police with what's going on, what happened in Dallas. And so I don't think anyone would disagree that they are heroes, and there's a lot of support for them. But I think what we're kind of forgetting is that there are a lot of veterans out there that still need a lot of help. A lot of them. Going all the way back to Vietnam. There are still Vietnam veterans that are suffering from the trauma when they were exposed in Vietnam, and all of the things that followed, whether it was Panama, Grenada, the Persian Gulf War. There are plenty of veterans who are suffering still from the Persian Gulf War because the VA doesn't offer the appropriate treatment that they need. So hopefully I'll be able to get more involved and actually be able to see things come to fruition and vets, living better quality lives as a result of the work that myself and the people that I work with are doing. So that certainly is a goal of mine.
Thank you, David.
So, my pleasure.
Anything else, Bill? All right, I just want to say before we look at your pictures that we're honored and humbled that you came today to speak to us of your sacrifice and contribution that you made in service to your country. And thank you, and God bless you, David.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Good job.
And he was in the Coast Guard and he's a police officer now?
Awesome. Then you guys switch sides.
That's Captain Crawford, who I described. He was my counterpart in Egypt.
Oh, nice. This is the old camouflage, desert camouflage, right?
Yeah, I think it has changed some since I was in the service.
It's a great picture, isn't it? You look like Captain Salamino here.
That's one of my favorite pictures. That's me in the Sinai Desert. That's the Red
That is
Sea
a
in the
really
background.
nice picture. Which isn't actually red.
No. And one of the jokes we had, if you could see it in the background there, is we would write home and say, hey, we're a stone's throw from the Red Sea. So we're sitting out the back of our barracks, and we decide, I wonder if we really are. So we got up, we picked up stones, none of us could hit the water. So we weren't really a stone's throw from the Red Sea.
Thank you. And this one? You're in your apartment, you said.
Yeah, that one's in my apartment. I think I have a pin-on picture here.
And does
This is my colonel on the bottom here, pinning me on when I made captain.
Oh, nice. Very nice picture. I like your hair. It's very cool.
I was so young looking then.
You wearing your pack reminds me of the story you told about the TV coverage.
Oh, yeah, with the... I mean, he had a
Light
pack on his front, he had a pack on his back, and he just looked at the camera and he goes, light infantry? And I remember that, I could picture it to this day, and that was what I said, I'm going to the 82nd Airborne. That was what flashed on the bottom, so...
Love it. Perfect. Okay, any others?
Yeah, that was when we graduated from the Judge Advocate General School. Trish Owens, I think her name was.
Oh, yeah. Is that your mom?
Yeah, that's my mother.
Oh, that's nice. Gotta have one with the mom.
Yeah, she was the only one that made it up for the graduation. And then that's where it has the Judge Advocate General School on it. And here's us at the shooting range. I'm not sure if I'm in that one or not, at the bottom. That's when I was at Fort Lee.
These are nice.
Yeah, these were all Fort Lee.
I just passed a bus that looks like that when I came onto the post today.
And then that one, that's me on the top there. Even lawyers had to learn how to fire weapons.
Good. How were you at it?
I was actually pretty good. At the range, this range I didn't do so good because I didn't get a lot of shots off. Someone said, oh, you're a lefty, you should use a lefty injector. So they put this injector on. So instead of, I'm firing this way and the bullet would go this way, it would go that way, the shell casing. And it just kept jamming up. So I would never do that again. So then after that, whenever I had to qualify at Fort Bragg, I would always just if the shell casing came this way and it went down my shirt, so be it.
Wow.
And it never happened, so I was better off without it. And then, I don't remember exactly what I qualified for, but I always qualified and did well in the range and also in the physical part of it as well.
Oh,
So-
very good. Right, thanks again for coming in today.
My pleasure.